A cold breeze swept through the schoolyard as children in faded uniforms ran around, their laughter echoing across the worn-out playground. Among them was Armin, a quiet but kind-hearted boy who always noticed things others overlooked. He saw how Rizwan, his classmate, always wore the same tattered shoes with torn soles. While other kids never paid attention, Armin couldn't ignore the fact that Rizwan often walked barefoot when the weather was bad, shivering as he tried to hide his discomfort. Have you ever wondered how a small act of kindness can change someone's life forever? We often think that big gestures are the ones that make an impact, but sometimes it's the simplest acts of compassion that leave the deepest mark. This is the story of a boy who saw a classmate in need and made a decision that would shape both their futures in ways neither could have imagined. Armin wasn't rich. His family wasn't well off, and he knew the value of money. But he also knew the pain of struggling, of wishing for something so small yet so important. He couldn't bear to see Rizwan suffer in silence. One evening, after school, Armin sat with his mother as she counted the household expenses. He hesitated but then gathered the courage to ask, "Ammi, can I use some of my savings?" His mother looked at him curiously. "For what, Beta?" He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I want to buy shoes for Rizwan. His are completely torn." His mother's eyes softened with pride. She had always taught Armin to be kind, but seeing him take such an initiative melted her heart. "Are you sure? That's your Eid money," she reminded him. Armin nodded without hesitation. "He needs them more than I need new clothes." And so, with his savings clutched tightly in his hand, Armin went to the local shoe shop the next day after school. He carefully picked out a sturdy pair, picturing how happy Rizwan would be when he received them. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would one day come full circle in the most unexpected way. The next morning, Armin arrived at school earlier than usual, clutching the neatly wrapped shoebox. His heart pounded with anticipation. He didn't want to embarrass Rizwan in front of the other kids, so he decided to give him the gift discreetly. Rizwan was sitting alone on a worn-out bench in the schoolyard, adjusting the straps of his torn shoes, which barely held together. His socks had holes, and his toes peeked out from the worn fabric. Armin took a deep breath, walked over, and placed the shoebox beside him. "What's this?" Rizwan asked, his eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "Open it," Armin said with a small smile. Rizwan hesitated but slowly untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. His eyes widened in shock as he stared at the brand-new pair of shoes inside. He looked up at Armin, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. "Armin, I can't accept this," he whispered, his voice shaking. Armin shook his head. "They're for you. You need them, and I want you to have them." Rizwan swallowed hard, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But why would you do this for me?" Armin shrugged, trying to act casual. "Because I know what it's like to want something and not have it. And because you're my friend." Rizwan stared at him for a long moment before nodding. He carefully pulled out the shoes, running his fingers over the smooth leather. He then took off his old, tattered pair and slipped into the new ones. They fit perfectly. He stood up, feeling the soft cushioning beneath his feet. For the first time in years, he felt comfortable walking. "Thank you, Armin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Armin grinned. "Come on, let's go to class before we're late." The school they attended was a modest government institution, with cracked walls and old wooden desks. Most students came from struggling backgrounds, their families barely making ends meet. Teachers did their best with limited resources, but it was a tough environment. Armin and Rizwan weren't the closest friends before this moment. They were simply classmates, boys who exchanged notes, borrowed pencils, and sometimes shared a joke in between lessons. But after that day, something changed. Rizwan began to stick close to Armin, his gratitude evident in the way he defended him whenever other kids teased him or how he always saved a seat for him in class. Armin never expected anything in return, but Rizwan never forgot his kindness. Years passed, and life took them in different directions. Armin's family continued to struggle financially, and by the time he turned 18, he had to take up small jobs to support them. He worked as a helper at a mechanic shop, fixing punctured tires and cleaning greasy tools. He had dreams of studying further, but money was tight. Rizwan, on the other hand, had to move away when his father found a better-paying job in another city. The two lost touch over the years, their bond fading into distant memories. But fate had other plans. One evening, as Armin was returning home from work, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He stumbled, gasping for breath, his vision blurring. Panic surged through him as he realized something was terribly wrong. Before he could call for help, his knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the pavement. Unbeknownst to him, someone was watching. Someone who would soon change his life forever, just as he had once changed theirs. Armin's body hit the cold pavement with a dull thud. The world around him blurred, his vision darkening as his breathing grew labored. He could hear the distant hum of traffic, the faint chatter of pedestrians, but it all seemed so far away. His chest felt like it was being crushed under an invisible weight. Just as the darkness threatened to pull him under, a pair of strong hands gripped his shoulders. A voice, urgent, yet familiar, called out his name. "Armin, stay with me. Can you hear me?" Armin tried to focus, his eyelids fluttering as he struggled to make sense of what was happening. The face hovering above him was blurry, but there was something strikingly familiar about it. The voice, too, carried a tone he couldn't quite place. "Call an ambulance," the man shouted to someone nearby. Moments later, Armin felt himself being lifted. He was placed inside a vehicle, and the wailing sound of a siren filled the air. The pain in his chest remained unbearable, but he could feel warmth, a comforting presence beside him. "You're going to be okay," the voice reassured him. "Just hold on." As the ambulance sped through the streets, Armin drifted in and out of consciousness. Memories flickered in his mind, his childhood, his struggles, the day he had given Rizwan a pair of shoes. He never expected that a simple act of kindness would lead to this moment. The next time Armin opened his eyes, he was lying in a hospital bed. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils, and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor echoed in the room. His chest still ached, but the pain was less intense. He turned his head slightly and saw a man sitting by his bedside. The man was tall, well-dressed, with an air of confidence. But it was his eyes, warm and filled with concern, that caught Armin's attention. And then, recognition hit him like a wave. "Rizwan," Armin croaked, his voice hoarse. Rizwan's face broke into a relieved smile. "You're awake." "Thank God." Armin stared at him in disbelief. The scrawny boy he had once known was gone. In his place sat a refined, successful man. His clothes were expensive, his posture composed, but his eyes still held the same kindness from years ago. What are you doing here?" Armin asked weakly. Rizwan let out a small chuckle. "Saving your life, apparently." Armin frowned in confusion. Rizwan leaned forward, his expression serious now. "You had a heart attack, Armin. If I hadn't been there at that moment, I don't know what would have happened." Armin's breath hitched. A heart attack? But he was still young. How could this happen? As if reading his thoughts, Rizwan continued. "The doctors said it was due to stress, exhaustion, and lack of proper nutrition. Have you been taking care of yourself at all?" Armin looked away, guilt washing over him. I've been working hard. My family needs money. I don't have time to worry about myself." Rizwan sighed, shaking his head. "You always were the selfless one. Even when you barely had anything, you still thought of others first." Armin glanced back at him, confusion flickering in his tired eyes. "How did you even recognize me?" "It's been years." Rizwan smiled softly. "I never forgot you, Armin. You were the first person who showed me kindness when I had nothing. That day, when you gave me those shoes, it changed my life. It made me believe that there were still good people in the world. And I promised myself that one day, if I ever got the chance, I'd repay that kindness." Armin was silent, overwhelmed by the weight of Rizwan's words. He had never expected anything in return for that small act of generosity, but here he was, being saved by the very person he had once helped. Over the next few days, Armin remained in the hospital under Rizwan's care. Rizwan had paid for all his medical expenses without hesitation. When Armin protested, Rizwan simply waved him off. "Consider it a favor returned," Rizwan said. "I owe you my life, Armin. Let me do this for you." But even as Armin recovered physically, an internal battle raged within him. He was grateful, but he also felt ashamed. He had spent years struggling, barely making ends meet, while Rizwan had flourished. A part of him wondered, why had fate been so kind to Rizwan, but so harsh on him? Sensing his turmoil, Rizwan finally spoke one evening. "Armin, I know you. I know you don't like accepting help. But listen to me. There's no shame in letting someone lend a hand. You once helped me when I needed it the most. Let me do the same for you now. Armin looked at him, his pride and gratitude at war. I don't want to be a burden. Rizwan chuckled. A burden? Armin, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be where I am today. You inspired me to work hard, to never forget where I came from. You're not a burden. You're a brother. Those words struck something deep within Armin. For the first time in years, he felt seen. Understood. He wasn't just some struggling mechanic. He was someone who had made a difference, even in a small way. Rizwan leaned forward, his expression serious. I want to help you, Armin, but I won't force you. Just think about it, okay? Armin nodded slowly. For the first time in a long while, hope flickered in his heart. Maybe, just maybe, his life was about to change. Days passed, and Armin's health gradually improved under Rizwan's care. The hospital stay gave him time to reflect on his life, the years of struggle, the sacrifices he had made for his family, and the never-ending battle to survive. One morning, as he sat by the window, staring at the bustling streets below, Rizwan walked in with a confident smile. Feeling better? Rizwan asked, setting down a tray of food. Armin nodded. Much better. Thanks to you. Rizwan pulled up a chair and sat across from him, studying him for a moment before finally speaking. Armin, I have a proposition for you. Armin raised an eyebrow. A proposition? Rizwan leaned forward, his tone serious. Come work for me. Armin's eyes widened in shock. Work for you? Rizwan nodded. Yes. I own an automobile company, one of the biggest in the city. We manufacture and service luxury vehicles. And I need someone like you, someone skilled, hardworking, and trustworthy, to manage one of my service centers. Armin's heart pounded. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Managing a service center for a top automobile company? It felt like a dream. But almost instantly, doubt crept into his mind. Rizwan, I appreciate the offer, I really do. But I don't have the qualifications for a managerial role. I've spent my life working under cars, not behind desks. Rizwan chuckled. That's exactly why you're the perfect person for the job. You understand cars better than anyone I know. You've been fixing them for years. You know what customers need. You know what mechanics struggle with. That experience is far more valuable than any degree. Armin looked down at his hands, still calloused from years of hard labor. Could he really do this? Could he step out of the only life he had ever known? Rizwan must have sensed his hesitation because he continued. I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. Just think about it. You've spent your entire life working for others, barely making enough to survive. Don't you think it's time you did something for yourself? Armin swallowed hard. The words hit deep. He had always put his family first, always prioritized their needs over his own. But maybe it was time to change that. Still, doubt lingered. What if I fail? He whispered. Rizwan smiled reassuringly. Then you'll learn. And I'll be there to help you. For the first time in a long time, Armin felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. That night, Armin lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Taking Rizwan's offer meant stepping into a world completely different from his own. It meant leaving behind the familiarity of the garage, the tools, the grease-stained clothes. But it also meant a chance at a better future. He thought about his mother, his younger siblings. How much easier their lives would be if he had a stable, well-paying job. No more struggling to pay rent, no more sleepless nights worrying about money. And then he thought about himself. Did he not deserve this opportunity? Had he not worked hard enough, suffered enough? By morning, his decision was made. When Rizwan arrived, Armin took a deep breath and met his gaze. All right, I'll do it. A wide smile spread across Rizwan's face. You won't regret this, Armin. Armin's first day at the service center was overwhelming. The place was massive, far bigger and more sophisticated than the small garage he had worked at for years. Mechanics bustled around, tending to sleek, high-end cars. The scent of engine oil and fresh polish filled the air. Computerized diagnostic machines blinked with complex data, and the reception area looked more like a luxury lounge than an auto shop. Dressed in a crisp uniform, no longer the oil-stained overalls he was used to, Armin felt out of place. Rizwan introduced him to the staff. Everyone, this is Armin. He's going to be overseeing operations here. Some of the mechanics exchanged skeptical glances. A few whispered among themselves. Armin could hear the doubt in their voices. He doesn't even have a degree. How can he manage the center if he's only worked as a mechanic? Let's see how long he lasts. The words stung, But Armin refused to let them shake him. He knew he had a lot to prove. Determined to earn his place, Armin threw himself into work. He spent long hours understanding the business side of things, learning about inventory, customer service, and employee management. He observed how experienced managers handled clients and how they resolved issues. But he didn't just stay behind a desk. Unlike other managers, Armin worked alongside the mechanics. He rolled up his sleeves, inspected vehicles, and even got under the hood when needed. His hands-on approach surprised the workers. One day, a junior mechanic struggled with a high-end sports car that wouldn't start. "It's an electrical issue," the senior technician said. "We'll need a specialist to fix it." Armin stepped forward. "Let me take a look." He studied the car's system, checked the wiring, and within minutes, identified the problem. With a few adjustments, the engine roared to life. The workshop fell silent. One of the mechanics muttered, "He fixed it just like that?" Another nodded. "Maybe he does know what he's doing." Little by little, Armin earned their respect. Not everyone was happy with his success. Some employees, especially the senior staff, weren't willing to accept a former street mechanic as their boss. One afternoon, Armin noticed that a high-priority client's car hadn't been serviced, despite clear instructions. He confronted the lead mechanic. "Why wasn't this done?" The man shrugged. "We had other cars to work on. Yours wasn't a priority." Armin's jaw tightened. Every client is a priority. If we delay service, we lose trust. The mechanic scoffed. "Look, kid, you may be the boss now, but you don't tell me how to do my job." The tension was thick. Everyone in the workshop watched, waiting to see how Armin would respond. Taking a deep breath, he spoke firmly. "I respect your experience, but if you can't follow instructions, then this isn't the right place for you." The mechanic glared at him but didn't argue further. Armin knew then, earning respect wasn't just about proving his skills. It was about standing his ground. Weeks turned into months, and the service center thrived under Armin's leadership. Customer satisfaction improved, efficiency increased, and even the skeptical employees started to acknowledge his expertise. One day, Rizwan visited. Seeing the bustling workshop, he smiled proudly. "I knew you could do it." Armin grinned. "I almost didn't believe it myself." Rizwan patted his shoulder. "You proved everyone wrong, Armin, including yourself." For the first time in his life, Armin felt something he had never experienced before, true confidence. Months passed, and under Armin's management, the service center saw remarkable growth. Customer satisfaction was at an all-time high, revenue increased, and even the most skeptical employees now respected him. One evening, as Armin finished his shift, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Armin." He turned around, and there stood Bilal. Bilal looked different. He was thinner, his clothes were worn out, and his eyes held a tiredness that Armin had never seen before. "Bilal, what are you doing here?" Armin asked, surprised. Bilal hesitated, then sighed. I need help, Armin. Things haven't been great. I lost my job. My father's business collapsed. We had debts, and everything fell apart." Armin felt a wave of emotions. The same Bilal who had once mocked him, who had belittled his dreams, was now standing in front of him, asking for help. "I heard you work here," Bilal continued, looking embarrassed. "I was hoping maybe you could help me get a job." Armin looked at his old classmate, the boy who had once had everything but had lost it all. He thought about the day he had bought him those shoes, the day that had changed both their lives forever. He had every reason to turn Bilal away, to remind him of all the insults, to repay him for the humiliation. But Armin knew better. He knew what it felt like to struggle, to have no one believe in you. He smiled. "Come with me." He led Bilal inside and introduced him to Rizwan. "This is Bilal. He's looking for work. I think he deserves a chance." Rizwan trusted Armin's judgment. After a brief interview, he nodded. "We could use someone in customer service. Bilal, are you willing to learn?" Bilal's eyes filled with gratitude. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you." As Bilal walked away to start his new role, Armin leaned against a car and reflected on everything. Life had come full circle. Years ago, he had given Bilal something small, a pair of shoes, but in the end, it wasn't about the shoes. It was about kindness, about lifting someone up when they needed it most. Armin had gone from a poor boy with nothing to a respected professional who had the power to change lives. And the biggest lesson he learned? Success isn't just about proving people wrong. It's about lifting others up, even the ones who once doubted you. He smiled to himself as he grabbed his tools and got back to work. Because no matter how much he achieved, he would always be the same Armin, the boy who believed in kindness, in second chances, and in the power of hard work. Life is unpredictable. The ones who look down on you today might need your help tomorrow. True success isn't about revenge, it's about compassion. So, if you ever have a chance to help someone, even when they don't deserve it, do it. You never know how it might change their life or yours.